of the things I hear a lot from leaders of companies is that managers play a critical role. And Gallup's actually seen that in our data, that who you name manager is one of the most important decisions you make. So part of what I think companies need to be concerned about is who are we naming manager? How are we equipping those individuals with what they need to lead at a higher level, to play that liaison role between leadership and the front lines, and also to develop and really engage their people. I think that's one of the pieces that when we ask people why they're leaving a company, they often don't talk about the company. They talk about one person, and that person is their manager. That whole idea of people joining companies but leaving managers is critical to retention, to performance, to engagement. And that's why I think for a lot of organizations, thinking differently about how they develop those managers, how they train them, how they incentivize them to really think about driving performance and development of their people is critical. In preparing people to manage and lead, and again, whether you're a manager or aspiring to be one, or you've been in different management roles throughout your career, if you pause to think about when did you learn how to do that? Well, for most people, they learned it on the job as they go. And it's interesting the number of times where I've heard executives, senior executives say, nobody ever taught me this. Like nobody ever slowed down to take even just 2 days. And it's funny how many times people go, can we not just do it in a day? It's like, but to take 2 days to really say, this is what it means to manage and lead at a higher level. And not just this is how to be nice to your people or how to know a little bit more about them, but the beauty of this course is it all links to performance. It's using Gallup's research and science and the tools that we've developed to really say, how do I begin to drive higher levels of performance within my team, within my organization? I think even one of the differentiators, and you hear managers and organizations talk a lot about culture, but I think they're doing themselves a disservice when they equate culture to, I call it the beanbags, baristas, and basketball hoops. They're talking about environmental things that really aren't going to retain people. What's going to retain people is them figuring out, how do I individualize my approach? How do I begin to think about this one person, maybe it's a woman in the workplace who just had a baby and loves her job, but wants some flexibility to be home or to have a day a week she works from home. So for managers to individualize their approach toward their team members, what does that person need or want or desire to still do their job, but actually do it even with a higher level of excellence? And so for a manager, it's not as simple as, here's your job description, go do it. But it really is part of the manager's job is to say, how do I understand that person? How do I coach them? How do I give them what they need to exceed and perform at the best level they possibly could?
Hey everybody, Coach here from the Be Best You podcast, where in order to lead others, you need to be the best version of yourself. You don't want to be a mess, right? And I'm really excited to have on this episode Jeremy Pietrocini. Jeremy works with Gallup. And in the beginning of the video or the podcast, excuse me, you're going to see a little 3-minute video that I, was really curious about it. In doing my research, and Gallup obviously comes up quite a bit. There was this little video that I saw, and I just love it. And I've been playing it for about the last 2-3 years in the leadership class that I do. And it's 3 minutes, but it's chock full of great information. And just wanted to chat with Jeremy a little bit about it, and then have him share some of his insight and also share some of the opportunities that Gallup can provide to anybody, any team, any leadership, any company. So welcome, Jeremy.
Thanks, John. Yeah. If people saw the video, they clearly know that was shot a few years back, for a little less gray in the beard.
Yeah, well, it looks good though. I mean, and I think you and I chatted originally, where what I loved about the video, well, first of all, I loved the way it was shot. And you had mentioned that when you were actually shooting it, they had talked to you about maybe writing a script, and you had said, no, I'd prefer to just kind of talk off the not off the cuff, but
Yeah.
the one thing I really liked about it was how genuine and real and authentic it was. And the reason I say this, because a lot of people I teach, especially younger guys, younger people
Yep.
in particular, they're very leery to trust, not authority, but the levels above them. And what I love about your video is you can tell it wasn't, corporate speak. It was real. And I love
Yeah.
that part of it.
Yeah. Well, John, it's one of the things, and Gallup, again, most people, when they hear Gallup, they think Gallup poll.
Right.
And one of my colleagues says we've been interrupting dinner since 1935. Usually when we're calling people around the world, 7 billion people on the planet, Gallup still today reports, what people are feeling and thinking. And,
Right.
when we've done research studying high performing organizations, high performing teams, high performing leaders, it really this theme of letting people bring their whole self to work. I know you've got a copy of our latest well-being at work book,
Yep.
but man,
Right.
when you integrate, Gallup's been saying this for years, people often talk about work-life balance. And for the last decade, we're like, you got to throw those words out because you are never going to balance those two things, even if you add up the hours you sleep at home, which many of us don't sleep enough anyways, but
Yeah.
you're never going to balance those. But when we can create work-life integration, and what that actually means, simply to what you're saying, is bring your whole self to work. Be you, be authentic who you are. So if you're super relational, be super relational. If you're super nerdy, geeky, analytical, like be you. And I think people know when we give ourselves permission to be that self versus trying to be like everybody else or be like a senior leader we look up to.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of starts in the beginning of the video. You actually mentioned, what makes, why do we move people into the management position? And I'll just say a quick story. My daughter is a soccer player. She was a very
Yeah.
good athlete growing up, right through her high school years. And all those years, she was maybe the best player on the team, which put her in a position of becoming the captain. And then she's playing collegiate, and she's now a junior. Seniors are typically the captain on the team she's on. But one thing that struck me was, you know, when people are the best on the team, or maybe the most talented in their position at work, the next level, or it seems like the level that a lot of people will push them to, is that role of captain and or leader. And when a lot of times they're not ready. um, and can you speak to that a little bit? And what's the best way you can maybe guide or give people that confidence that the person that they're putting in that leadership role isn't not just the best player, but they're also capable of being a leader? Learning on the job is what you mentioned in your video.
Yep. Yeah, I think, in a lot of organizations, Gallup included, we refer to it as key experiences.
Okay.
There are some people that have natural raw talent for leadership, but you use the term readiness. Now, one of my colleagues, who's co-authored the book, Strength-Based Leadership, another one of Gallup's books, but he's like, I don't know that people are ever ready. He's like, I don't, I've been, nobody was ready for a pandemic. And even if we felt like we kind of were, we weren't really ready. But, that idea of, do I have the right key experiences? Do I have some of those reps? So one of the things Gallup talks about in a lot of our strength-based books is when you and I know our natural talents or strengths,
Right.
and then we multiply that. So we use this little simple mathematical equation of talent times investment. And with investment, we're actually saying knowledge, skill, and experience. So for your daughter or others on the team, right? Like, do they have the necessary reps? Are we giving them some of those key experiences? Sometimes I think too many coaches in sports or too many senior executives in business, we're too hands-on and we're not giving people those key experiences that we want them to have. I mean, we sometimes say this, we're going to do job competency or job rotation, and they get a little bit of that, but are we actually giving them the opportunity to lead? And so again, those experiences on the job are critical. The other thing, and this one can be controversial a little bit, but Gallup, in our research, we found that only about 1 in 10 individuals, so if we grab 10 people off the street or 10 of your next candidates, right, in your whatever organization, only 1 of those 10 natural human beings has the capacity to manage and lead others. Now, some of them are great project managers, some of them are great individual contributors. There's another 2 in 10, by the way. So good news, there's another 2 in 10 that when we equip them and train them and teach them how to manage and lead, they'll get it really quick. They will be fantastic leaders. But that means 3 in 10 individuals have a natural capacity to lead and manage others. The other 7 in 10, some of them, and even as they're listening, they're like, I hate that part of my job. I'm a CEO, but the managing people part I don't like, or I'm a manager. And if you ask people why they took it or why we promoted them, oftentimes it's just because they were so good as individual contributors. And so how do we create a culture where people can be phenomenally successful as individual contributors? Others can aspire and get those key experiences to want to manage and lead and be sort of a coach to the team. But I think in too many environments, we elevate the manager title. And for some people, by the way, they're great project managers, but when we give them people to manage, they manage us like we're projects. And so many of you out there are managed by those managers, and you're like, we need to get them project oriented and get somebody else managing the people piece.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna have to rewind that one back. I like that one. So instead, managing, they manage people like they would manage a project.
Yeah.
Um, I remember Christy Rampone, who was the U.S. women's soccer captain for years, happened to be live in our town here. And when my daughter was a young freshman, sophomore, I was the type of player who was like Mickey. Her name is Michaela. Mickey, you need to get in the huddle. You need to get in there. She's a point guard, center
Yeah.
mid, and she's like, Dad, no, that's not my job. And I was like, yeah, but you're the best on the team, or maybe you're one of the best on the team.
Yeah.
And Christy mentioned to me, let her find her voice, and you be a father, not the coach. And there's a lot of lessons in that little thing, but I think that's the thing was in letting her find her voice, her leadership voice. And now I'm happy to say, her junior year going into her senior year, she's talking on the field, she's directing, she's more comfortable in that role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that piece again, where I'm with you as a dad too, John, when I talk to some of my colleagues or coaches about how to coach my kids, they end up coaching me.
Yeah.
They're kind of giving me the advice.
So true.
But I think, Gallup uses that terminology a lot. One of the books we published a couple years back, just before the pandemic, simple title, the book's called It's the Manager. And I tell people who aren't readers, I'm like, if you just read the title, yeah, there it is. Yeah.
There it is. Yep.
Like, if you just read the title, it's not a mystery novel. There's not a surprise ending. It actually validates something that Gallup found in the late 90s. Actually, the very first book Gallup published that became a New York Times bestseller was a book called First Break All the Rules. And we had no idea it was going to become a New York Times bestseller. We're just a polling company throwing data out there. But we published this simple little line, and this is in the 90s. And it was that people join companies, but they leave managers. Now, you and I have heard that. We've seen it retweeted, but it came from a very simple Gallup data point when we asked people, why did you join the company, versus when we ask them why they leave. And I think that element too of when we think about great managers, and the subtitle of that book, It's the Manager, says moving from boss to coach. Right. And I think sometimes as parents, sometimes as athletic coaches, sometimes as managers in business, we've been taught to put on the boss hat. So we got to push them, we got to challenge them. And again, we do have to challenge people and give them bigger goals than even they might dream. But when we bully them, and I'm using that word bully, when we become the boss, we put on the boss hat, we go, hey, got to be tough on you here. This is my New Jersey, I live in Cleveland, but you get the Jersey side, right? You're like, this is just who I am. I got to be tough on you. I'm going to be hard on you. Because the reality is a coach might sometimes be hard, but a coach is being hard on you as a collaborator. They're on the sidelines helping you to become that. They're coaching you. They're actually sometimes saying, what did you think you did right there? What do you think you did wrong there? They're giving, and I love that coach's advice to you and to your daughter of like, let her find her voice, like commend when she's doing things right. Because the reality is, even in a situation like that, leadership's not just a title or the C on her jersey as the captain, but it's a leader. One of my favorite definitions of a leader is when you look behind you and there's people willingly following, not following because they're supposed to or because they have, but they're willingly. So in a situation like that with sports and in high school or college, you're like, man, when you're saying something and people are respecting your leadership, you're like, she's going to gain confidence to go like, wow, Dad, they're listening to me, and giving her permission to just coach her, to pull the best out of her, which is another thing Dr. Clifton would often say. He's the inventor of Clifton Strengths, and his is now passed away, but his son, Jim Clifton, is Gallup's current chairman and CEO. Okay. But Dr. Clifton, he's a professor of psychology back in the 50s and 60s. And he just said, we ought to stop trying to put into people what was left out, but we ought to spend more time trying to pull out what's already there. And so sometimes we take that little 4-year-old on the playground who's super introverted, and we're saying, go make friends, right? And then we take the super extroverted kid and we're like, quit, that's their popsicles, get out of there. We don't know them. Sorry about him, and we're trying to make people something they're not. And Dr. Clifton just very simply saying, what if as coaches, as managers, as leaders, we actually pull the best out of people. We give people permission to bring their whole self to work. We pull out the best, let them find their voice, and then position them in ways where they get to do what they do best every day.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's another one. Yeah. There's a young man named Clint Pulver wrote a book called I Love It Here. Kind of came across him recently. And what he did was, I think he took about 5 years, he started a thing called Undercover Millennial. Okay. And what he did was he collected a lot of the similar data that Gallup does. And that's what I love about Gallup is, when you navigate in the leadership and the coaching world, everybody kind of picks a certain book or they like a certain approach. But Gallup is proven. It's I think even in your video you talk about research, proven data
Yep.
that backs up these not theories but practices or
Right.
approaches.
John, I
Uh,
sometimes jokingly tell people, I'm like, you don't need to agree with the data. You're just disagreeing with 7 billion people. So it's
yeah.
just,
Okay.
it's up to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that brings a point. This whole idea of well, one, I think it's generational. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
56 years old, I think, and my generation was kind of the last generation, maybe, where managers or were called managers or bosses were what you were called, and you were supposed to be tough and
Yep.
authoritarian and things like that. But lately in the last couple of generations, this idea that maybe managers and bosses are becoming soft. But I like now where it's landed, where it maybe started off with this tough management boss, old school coach. There was a period of transition. I think now people are realizing that um, leadership, while at times needs to be direct, but it can be more nurturing, more inclusive, and really talk about, back in the day, it didn't talk about culture, talk about performance. Now culture is a big word in today's world, right?
Yeah. When culture existed, and think about when we even talked culture 20 or 30 years ago, we were probably thinking about, oh, I was in Hong Kong and you experience the culture and the food and just, it's very simply, Gallup defines it as culture is how we do things, right? Or how we live. So it's our habits and the way we dress. And again, in Japan, there's a very different culture than in New York City. And so when you begin to think about kind of just culture and how we do things, as organizations, we should care about our culture. And part of it, very simply, we know there's a lot of organizations out there that focus on their brand and how they want to be known. And a lot of us remember the Enron story, an organization that had very beautiful value statements: integrity, honesty, trust, right, written on the wall. And but when there's the who we want to be or who we say we are, versus, we call that your brand, versus how we actually live and do things, there's inconsistency or lack of integrity there.
Yeah.
And so the reason I think so many organizations, and again, Gallup as a polling company, we do a ton of annual surveys or biannual surveys for companies on culture and engagement, and saying, are we truly, not just at an organizational level, but even at a local level? Like if I manage 4 more people, I'm getting my scores back to look at the team to say, how are they feeling? What does this look like? And that culture piece, even on the back of that, it's the manager book. Again, we sort of wrote it for readers, but even non-readers were like, pick whatever chapter matters to you. There's a chapter on culture. There's a chapter on diversity and equity and inclusion. And what's interesting is the very back of the book, we highlight, and you were talking about millennials, we highlight what we call the big 6. And it actually were kind of 6 big nuggets that came out of our research we did a few years back on millennials and Gen Z. Which, by the way, millennials, it's 2021 right now, and you and I are doing this video, but millennials are turning 40 this year, or have turned 40. So they're not as young as they're not as young as they once were. But with millennials and Gen Z, the big shift, like that, we would, some of those big 6, I won't hit on all of them, but some of them that we found that really emphasize culture is we'd say purpose trumps paycheck. Now, they're not saying I'm going to work for free. They actually have more school debt and loans than many of us did coming into work, so they need a paycheck. But the sense of, is it an organization where the what we do and why we do it, Simon Sinek's work of start with why, it's inspiring to a younger generation to say, here's why I want to show up, or why I want to work hard, or why I want to do good work. So that purpose piece, and that's about culture, right? So that piece is there. The other thing that we see in that is, it's not just about satisfaction, check the box, and I'll do my job, and then I live for the weekends or my nights and weekends or when life happens. It's this work-life integration that I was talking about, where we don't need to separate your personal life, professional life. For many of us, the pandemic has accelerated this. Managers now know, oh, you have kids. Oh, I see the picture of your daughter behind you. Oh, you have 6 cats. Oh, you get something from Amazon every 7 minutes, right? We've learned things about each other on a personal level that maybe we didn't know before. But Gallup would just emphasize this younger generation, millennials and Gen Z, they want that work-life integration. They don't just want a job where it's check the box and collect a paycheck. They want a job where there's the ability to grow and develop. Right. Help me grow and develop. And that one of the nuggets that's there as well is they actually said, and I sort of misinterpreted it when I first heard it, I don't want a boss, I want a coach. And again, we've been talking about a coach a little bit, but I don't know if you played sports growing up, John, but I wrestled competitively. And in Northeast Ohio, wrestling's super competitive. My wrestling coach was not just a cheerleader. He was not just a good job, little buddy, right? So Gallup by no means, and even from the research, this younger workforce is not just saying, just give me a trophy. And I mean, there's some of that, but it's not just just give me a trophy and leave me alone. What they're actually saying, and Gallup does some work with the NFL, and I had the chance to share this with the commissioner and his team. I said, in the NFL, you guys there's 32 teams. All of those teams have owners, but the owner sits where? Up in the skybox. If they have feedback to give somebody, maybe there's a phone up there, right? But I'm like, they're not running down to the sidelines. They sort of write things down and then let people know at the end of the season, right? If it's really good or really bad, I'm sure they're going to come out or they're going to talk about it. But the coach is at the game as well, but the coach is on the sidelines. The coach is going, John, that was good, man. Do that again. They're cheering you on. They're being an advocate. If it's raining, they're getting rained on. So they're in it with you. It's not just corner office, separate, the boss from the individual, but they're not just a cheerleader. There's times, and one of my buddies who runs a nonprofit back in Omaha, Nebraska, where Gallup's operational headquarters is at, he's like, Jeremy, he loves American football. He's like, as a manager, sometimes I got to grab people by the face mask. Now, he does not make his employees wear helmets, but what he's saying is sometimes I got to get close enough to say, hey, we can't do that. Like, we got to, but it's immediate feedback, right? It's in the moment feedback.
Right.
And then there's other moments where we go, that was incredible. And you're going to go, well, Jeremy, it was, but, and I go, no, but like, John, that was really good, man. Keep doing that. But it's when managers become more of that, hey, we're there in the moment. We're giving people periodic feedback. We've become their coach. By the way, coaches can pull off the Band-Aid when we need to and be tough.
Right.
But we don't have to put on the boss hat. We just go, man, I'm your coach. I'm telling you this because you need to hear it. You need to hear it now, not 3 months from now when we're supposed to meet for your review. So that coaching in the moment piece is about culture. And I know people that they would say, this team I'm a part of, or this in a franchise environment, we've got that here. Our manager is a coach. And across town, it could be the exact opposite. Same company, same words on the wall, but the way those local leaders lead, if it's too much of that bully or, hell or high water, here's how you got to do things, it's just not going to have the same impact on the culture. And therefore, Gallup's actually seen that you're not going to have the same productivity, profitability, turnover is going to be higher than you want it to be. All of those things matter when coaches create culture.
Yeah. So my dad was a phys ed teacher, athletic director in high school.
Yeah.
Growing up, that's kind of how I got the moniker Coach Hughes is kind of what people know me as.
Yeah.
And I think, again, going back to where the best players sometimes ascend or put in position of being the leader, and we kind of fail them instead of them failing. It's the same thing with coaches, where if somebody knows how to do something really well, they tend up being put in that position of the instructor or the coach, when coaching isn't knowing how to do something. It's all those little soft skill things that you were talking about, which is, again, the coach moniker, I think, gets thrown around way too cavalierly. I think to me, it's something I take very serious and personal. And you can be in a position of coaching, and I use the same thing with leadership. And I love what you said earlier too about, and the only way you're really a leader is when people choose to follow you. But there's a lot of people in that position of leadership, but aren't leading. They're just and some of it's because they choose to, and some of it's because they really don't know how to.
Yeah.
Lead, right. I mean, the other thing I loved was in creating kind of this culture. Championships won in the locker room. I mean, you can obviously have to have talent on the field too, but let's see if I get these three right. Basketball,
beanbag baristas and basketball hoops. Yeah.
That just resonates with me because so many people recognize that they need to make work fun and engaging.
Yeah.
And in the Google world, where you can slide from the third floor to the first floor in a circular slide, or you can sit in a beanbag or ride your bike through the office.
Yeah.
Kind of speak to that a little bit, and hopefully people watch your 3-minute video, kind of see where that's placed in your
Yeah, I think, and you said this earlier, that that term or topic of culture is being talked about a lot. I think even in a very healthy way. I love how much people are talking about it, but I think they have to pause and figure out what actually is culture and then what creates culture.
Right.
Now the reality is one of my colleagues, he's part of our research team at Gallup. He goes, like a belly button. We all have one. We may not like it, but that's what culture is. You have a culture, whether you like it or not. Every organization, even sub teams, again, a lot of organizations I'm working with have different offices in different parts of the country or the world.
Right.
And they sort of have these subcultures. Or does our education team have a slightly different culture than our government division? You're like, there's some of that, and you're like, oh, some of that makes sense, and some of that makes sense for who we are and how we serve. But I think what people confuse culture as, and especially in maybe the last 10 years, before even pre-pandemic, and we were forced to work from home, people are just trying to figure out, like, do we need to create flex time on Fridays, or can people wear jeans, or is it a free coffee, right? And again, some of the big tech companies out there, like the Googles, and I've been on site in beautiful office space, and they get people to stay long hours because you got a little nap room, or they've got food. By the way, I've been in line behind people in some of those tech companies complaining because they were out of the ahi tuna grade, and I'm like, dude, you're getting free sushi for lunch.
Yeah.
Anyways, so part of what when we make it too much about environment, and I just use that terminology of beanbags, baristas, and basketball hoops. Oh, we need some of those, or we got a ping pong table, so now we have a good culture. Like, no, we don't. Those might be okay, and those, again, my wife's an interior designer, so I know that those environmental things matter. In some of the restaurants that you help coach, those environmental things matter. But what matters more is very simply the way we live. So culture is not just about those environmental things. It's about the way we live. And I think what's really interesting, Gallup does this for clients, but you can do it for any organization or your own team. Mm-hmm. I'll say, ask people to write down on a piece of paper 3 words they would use to describe the culture. And you might be surprised, like, what are they saying? Is it just all about performance and all about numbers and all about sales? Sometimes the senior leaders will add in more aspirational stuff because it's more who they want to be. But you're like, but if the employees on the front lines aren't feeling that and living that out, the way we change it is not beanbags and baristas and basketball hoops. It's not free sushi for lunch. The way we change it is holding the mirror up to ourselves as leaders. And one of my colleagues, Dr. Brian Bram, he said this once. We were doing some work for Southwest Airlines, and he said, I think you guys get it right when we fly your airline, because you always tell us if the oxygen mask drops, put our own mask on first. Yeah. And he said, what we're often trying to do is change everybody else. And as leaders, we got to just say, am I living this stuff out? Right. Huh. When I say we're a people focused culture, am I actually, or I say we're a culture of creativity? Are we, does it start with me and kind of putting our own oxygen mask on first? I think is step one for leaders in all roles.
Love that. Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking of 2 things. And these are gentlemen that I was able to get to know and actually interviewed as well. One of them is named Dan Thurman, and he wrote a book. I'll send these to you. It's called Off Balance on Purpose. And it talks about, you were talking about well-rounded life, and everybody tries to get that, but maybe not having it is a good thing. And then another gentleman by the name of Jason Hewlett, he wrote a book called Promise to the One, to your point, where, you have to look yourself in the mirror, as a leader. With the Be Best You, the process that we take is a 3-step process. And that is, we do a life assessment, which tells you where you are today. And then we look at a habits and a choice part, which means you became who you are because of your habits and your choices. And then the third part is, only after those 2 can you decide where you want to go. And that's, most people want to be better than who they are, but they never change their habits or their goals.
Yep.
And then the other part is, I love how, and again, I should memorize the little 3-minute video. I play it again every clip, but you say, most companies will want to invest or feel investing in culture is important. And they'll say, it'll take 2 days, but they want to do it in 1. I see that a lot, where what I love about your data is that it proves that investing in culture and employee engagement is good for the top line and the bottom line, because the front line is stabilized.
Yep.
but management hates it. They're like, oh, we don't want to spend money on it. And how much is it going to cost? And can we do it for less? Can you speak to that a little bit about why it's important that companies do make that investment in the full process of creating culture?
Yeah. So two big things, and this again kind of echoing what we've been talking about with what creates culture. So developing leaders that actually live it out, and then holding those leaders and teams accountable. Which again, Gallup would just say, just like the scale in my bathroom, I can step on it. It's going to give me real data. No, I could argue whether that thing. I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
But it's going to give me real data just to say, how am I doing? And so when companies do a culture audit or they do ongoing engagement or culture surveys, that's just a data point. So, and I always push leaders too, because I'm like, just because you're measuring doesn't mean you're actually creating change, And by the way, I'm really good at flossing the week before I go to the dentist. Somehow my hygienist knows if I've only been flossed. So, before the annual survey comes out, we're like, hey, just want to recognize you guys and let you know we're best friends. And, here's the pizza party. Like we're all good at that, like right before the survey comes out. But what are we doing throughout the year? And I think this is where the investment side that you're hitting on, we want even back to the stepping on the scale in my bathroom. I want the do this for 24 hours and you're going to lose 10 pounds or be fit, 6-pack abs. Or I'm like, nope, those things don't work. So the reality is, what are we doing in those small little incremental in the moment? We even refer to it as engagement every day. Mm-hmm. And so when Gallup talks about here are the 12 things that matter, things like recognition, things like employees feeling heard, making sure people know what's expected of them. By the way, only 50% of people around the world can actually give a 5 on a 5-point scale. Only 50% of people can give a 5 to, I know what's expected of me at work today. Wow. And some organizations that I talk to high performing, they're like, well, yeah, things move a lot. I go, okay, that's great. But if we were wheeling you back in a surgery and we said, John, you got a team of 10 surgeons and only 5 of them are able to give a 5 to, I know what's expected of us at work. You're like, I don't care if they're giving 4s or 3s, like wheel me back out, right? So What's interesting is I think if we were able to realize, which I think most organizations realize this, there are things we could do to improve performance even beyond where it's at. So this isn't just, culture is not just about organizations that are struggling, but we're talking about, with even the Me Too movement and the things it created of what's okay and what's not okay in our workplace environments. And do we hold ourselves to higher standards? And diversity and equity and inclusion and some of the civil unrest that's been happening through 2020 and 2021. Like all these companies are talking about those things.
Yeah.
Gallup would say those are cultural things. Like those are things that are beyond just what's our product and what's our price and does a customer feel like it's fair. Simon Cooper, by the way, a former chief operating officer from the Ritz-Carlton, and we highlight his story in one of our books, and Gallup's done a lot of work with Ritz over the years. He very simply just said, when it comes to customers, feelings are facts.
Yeah.
And you can expand that to say when it comes to human beings. So if our employees are feeling like we don't care and we don't care about the work-life piece. So the measurement piece is let's figure out how they are feeling. Like let's listen to people once or twice a year and get that pulse check. And then for us as leaders, what do we need to begin to do? Not just once a year for a week of the year, but what are we doing every single day to measure and manage those things? And it's actually interesting, the development piece, when we say spending money on measurement and development of your leaders, whether that's through coaching, whether that's through Gallup's got a 2-day Boss to Coach course that a lot of organizations send leaders through, whether it's any of those sort of invest in your leaders. What we actually know is one of the biggest reasons that people will join, especially for millennials, Gen Z, one of the biggest reasons they'll join your or my organization is if they feel like it's an organization that's going to be committed to help them grow and develop. The number one reason why people leave organizations, and not just millennials, Gen Z, but of all generations, is they don't feel like they have the opportunity to learn and grow. You're like, development, I mean, you hear people say it, new opportunity, it might have come with bigger dollars. But if we're not developing and investing in our leaders, and especially, by the way, through the pandemic, we know when we publish this in that Wellbeing at Work book, managers have felt more stress and burnout. Managers and leaders feel more stress and burnout than even the people that we lead. And so are we measuring that? Are we able to report that? Are we able to say, what can we do to make sure we're not losing and burning these people out? And again, investing in your leaders, developing your leaders, and then having some kind of accountability assessment on culture to say, how are we doing? Are we moving the needle? Do people feel like we're doing better? or don't they? And if they don't, well, then we need to change some things.
Yeah, I'm kind of bringing it to a kind of closure here, but be best you. Becoming the best version of yourself so you can lead others. And part of it is if you're relying on your company to develop you, which would be great. I think companies should do it.
Yep.
So taking ownership in that in itself, and you actually investing in yourself. What are some things that Gallup can provide, obviously the books that you just talked about, which I'll share every one of those books with people, and I still do. But what are some things that they can do? Because I think one of the things that we talk about in the leadership class is a lot of them are really hard workers, and they're told to work smart, but they don't know how to. And we always say, always work hard, but learn to work smarter. But they don't know where to go, where they go to get smarter. And working on themselves lots of times is perceived as being selfish, when you're being selfish, not working on yourself. The idea with the mask again, but working on yourself is selfless. And in order to be the best for others, you have to be the best for yourself. So what are some things that you would recommend an individual doing who may not be able to afford some of the longer, bigger courses, even though I think your courses are great? What can they do? What can they do?
Yeah. And this is where I love that Gallup has these books, John, because as you know, you can go on Amazon and get something for $12 or whatever. But I would start, and to your point, we've said this several times, put your own oxygen mask on, hold the mirror up to however you want to say it. Mm-hmm. Gallup's got several books that have a Clifton Strengths assessment code in the back. And the code, by the way, over 25 million people on the planet have taken it. So there's a lot of you that are listening that go, wait, I did that years ago. I got those 5 words. I'd pull that report back out, or I'd grab a copy of that book. Strength Finder 2.0 is one. There's another one called Strength-Based Leadership. There's a Strength-Based Parenting. So whatever your topic or focus, Strength-Based Sales, any of those, I think Strength Finder 2.0, there you go. But in the back of that, it's got a code. You can also, if you're not a reader, just go on to Clifton Strengths, and people can buy a code for $20, gives you top 5, or $50, give you their full 34 rank order. But I think starting with knowing themselves is really important. And then very simply, they could say, okay, who are some key people in my life? Like my wife and my kids have both taken that. But I now understand my son is much more motivated by competition and ideation, and don't tell him how to do stuff, get out of his way. My daughter is much more people oriented. So she's got a Gallup strength called Woo, which is winning others over. So like for her, she doesn't want to do things just for the achievement piece. It's who's in it. And there's still an achievement orientation, but who do I get to do it with? So understanding myself, and then understanding where they're at. And then the other book I would mention is It's the Manager, because I think that just gives some of those basics I mentioned kind of these 12 things that Gallup talks about. I think of my Italian grandmother making pasta sauce, and she'd put that wooden spoon to her lips and be like, oh, it needs a little bit more of this or that.
Yeah.
Whether you're a new manager or you've been doing it for 20 years, if we just use our eyes and our ears as kind of our manager you're like, I wonder how my team's feeling today. If a culture survey came out today, you guys know how your team's going to rate some things. And if you don't, dial your ears up and say, hey guys, how you feeling? Like, what's going on? Ask and genuinely listen. So I think that's sort of those coaching tips that are in that It's the Manager book. I think both those under $20 each book, and you're going to get some great insights into how to lead and know yourself, and then how to be a better coach and listen to those that you lead.
Even the low fees that you guys have. My wife and I bought the whole packet. The Strength Finder, big binder, briefcase almost. And there's so much content in there. And I was like, what do I go through first? And my wife kind of said, why don't you start with where the directions, and then follow that. And I was like,
directions.
That's not one of my strengths, I guess. But well, listen, I can talk to you forever. I love again that video. We play it, and I talk for about 45 minutes. You got a 3-minute video there. You guys will see it in this clip. And I hope that everybody gets on the website. And what's the best way? Should they go to Gallup.com?
Gallup.com is the easiest place to start, and there's resources they can find on there. Again, there's a lot of, the thing I love about Gallup is when there's data stuff we're reporting, like what do we know about back to work? What do we know about managers and stress? There's there's white papers we're publishing all the time, tons
Yeah.
of free data. And then it'll always point you to some of those books or courses or whatever. Again, if it's a CEO of a company and going, gosh, we need to do more of this, all of that, Gallup.com is a great place to start. So
Yeah, I love all that stuff. So, well, Jeremy, I appreciate it. I know you're a busy man, and we don't want to keep the attention span. Everybody today is like 15 minutes, so hopefully they stay to the end. But I certainly appreciate it. I know that the listeners and watchers will as well. And I thank you, sir.
you
And
bet.
hope to be in touch again when I'm out there in Cleveland, Columbus area, or you're back here east. Let's try to connect somehow.
Absolutely. John, thank you for everything you're doing, man. Appreciate
All right,
it.
thank you. Coach Hughes, Coach's Corner here. Be best you. See you next time.